Hey everyone, my name's Nick. I did Chem back in 2010 and here's a few tips that made a huge difference to me. Tip 1. Don't learn formulas, understand them. A lot of the formulas in chemistry can be confusing to try and remember from the letters alone. Even with the formulas provided, it's really easy to mix up n equals little m divided by big M. Instead, take a step back and try to recognize what the formula is for. For instance, in that case, instead of remembering that big M equals little m on n, you can identify that big M is the molar mass, given in grams per mole, little m is in grams, and n is the number of moles. It makes sense that to find grams per mole, you would divide number of grams by number of moles. Chemistry is notorious for taking marks off here and there, even when you have the correct answer, but forget to do the little things that they require. The two biggest sources of these type of errors are significant figures and forgetting to include states. For significant figures, I'd recommend working with more figures than necessary during the working stage, and when writing out the final answer, do a check of how many significant figures the least accurate piece of information has, and do your final round off then. The reason that I suggest working with a couple of extra sig figs is to avoid rounding errors. If you cut your sig figs off too early, a 0.49 might round up to a 0.5, which could cause a later calculation to round up instead of down and change your answer slightly. Plus, it's also much more convenient to not have to worry about rounding off after every step, and it makes you more conscious of doing it at the end. Another source of lost marks is forgetting to give the states in chemical formulas. So as a final check, go through and make sure that you've added states to any formulas that you've written. Even if you're unsure of the state of a particular element or compound, it's worth taking your best guess. Tip 3. Understanding theory. Unfortunately, chemistry isn't really about rote learning large chunks of theory. You'll need to know the theory quite well, but in the exam, multiple knowledge areas are often combined. You'll need to understand the theory and be ready to apply it rather than just memorizing things. Of course, some things are just presented as facts without an explanation, and it can be sometimes hard to determine which things you'll need to understand and which can just be memorized. Personally, I like to find a short explanation for everything, just a one-line rationalization of why that is such. For instance, increasing pressure increases temperature for gases. You don't need to know a huge amount of detail, just that increased pressure is the same as having a smaller container. This means that the same energy is compressed into a smaller area, so now the same area of heat is contained in a smaller area, which means that there is more heat per unit volume and hence increased temperature. Short explanations like that will not only help if you're asked to explain why that relationship occurs, but will also help you remember that relationship, because instead of it just being a fact to rote learn, it's now a concept that makes sense to you. Tip 4. Create summary sheets for each chapter or topic. This tip is not necessarily as important as the previous ones. This is more of what I personally did for chemistry that I think worked really well. I had a one-sided A4 sheet for each chapter of the course. Your mileage may vary, but I found that one page was a good trade-off, as it's long enough that you can cover the entire topic, but it also forces you to understand and summarize the important points. I talked in the previous tip about short, sharp summaries for concepts, and limiting yourself to a page per chapter will force you to really boil down those wordy explanations in the textbook to a 1 or 2 sentence description that you can remember much easier. The act of having to think about how to simplify that concept to yourself will also help you commit things to memory and think critically about how everything works. If there's anything that you're just blindly copying word for word from the textbook, this is a great time to seek a bit of extra help. Ask your teacher and see if they can help you understand the concept rather than just rote learn the definition. These are probably the biggest 4 things I can think of that helped me get through VCE chemistry. I'd love if there was one secret that suddenly made chemistry a breeze, but unfortunately, nothing beats hard work and practice, practice, practice. These tips are designed to help you take away that daunting element of chemistry and break it down into something more manageable and logical. Remember, everyone is different and not all of these tips are going to work for everyone. If you like writing 12-page summaries about each topic and that's what works for you, go for it. But if you're a bit lost and just need to be pointed in the right direction, I hope you find these tips helpful.